The best CEOs, admirals, and generals I've ever worked with are realize how often they can be wrong, so that plagues them. So they're always in search of what they don't know. An interesting distinction I've seen with successful people versus not. Successful people tend to have the frame of what don't I know and in search of. Unsuccessful people tend to want to verify and legitimize all the things they do know. So they're in search of confirmation that they do know. But the greatest leaders are plagued with the reality. There's so much I don't know. I always have to be learning.
Welcome to the Strategy at Scale podcast, brought to you by Scaling Up and Outthinker. I'm your host, Kahin Krippendorf. Our mission here is to cut through a sea of conflicting business advice to get to what actually works. We talk to entrepreneurs, business leaders, and advisors who work closely with executive teams as organizations scale to surface practical strategies for building long-term value. You just heard from Stephen Gaffney, a leading expert on building high-performing teams through honest communication, change management, and practical leadership tools. Stephen has advised leaders across Fortune 500 companies in the U.S. government and military, and he's the author of multiple books. Today, we're talking about his latest, Unconditional Power. If you're a strategist, an innovator, a business builder, an owner, you know that the only way to get things done is through your team. And in this conversation, we explore the fundamentals of high-performing teams, how mood, communication, and assumptions quietly shape strategic discussions and team behavior. We talk about what happens when teams operate in reaction mode, how unspoken concerns distort alignment, and why leaders often confuse data with the stories they tell themselves about that data. Stephen also walks through practical moments leaders face when scaling, disagreement in the room, incomplete information, pressure to move fast, and how the ways those moments are handled determines whether strategy moves forward or stalls. Throughout this conversation, we stay grounded in the realities of building and scaling organizations, where strategy isn't decided in isolation, but through conversations, trade-offs, and real human dynamics. In this episode, we cover the 3 moral states Stephen uses to describe how teams show up to strategy conversations, why execution breaks down around what isn't said, and how leaders can surface those gaps, how leaders confuse facts with the stories they tell themselves about those facts, and what to do in that moment, what alignment looks like after disagreement, and why agreement isn't the same thing, why uncertainty is unavoidable at scale, and how leaders move forward without waiting for perfect plans. If your role involves guiding strategy through uncertainty, disagreement, and real human dynamics, this conversation is for you. Let's dive in with Stephen Gaffney. Stephen, thank you so much for being here with us. I really enjoyed reading your latest book. Excited to dive into it. Where are you joining us from today?
Out of Washington, D.C.
Okay. Are you based in Washington, D.C. full-time, or are you visiting?
No, I'm based in Washington, D.C. I'm
Yeah.
just smiling because it's the city of much dysfunction.
That we're going to be talking about the opposite of that, right?
Yeah.
I gotcha. Excellent. So, your first book was around team excellence, and this book is about, well, ostensibly it's about power, but as I read about it more, I see that it is about also team excellence and creating like effective leadership. So just like frame it for us. Can you tell us what unconditional power is in your definition?
Absolutely. The whole basis of the book is when we're in a good mood, we're smarter. I know that sounds kind of obvious, but people often forget that, and we don't really take into account whether we're building a strategy or whether we're working as an organization or just any team. The mood and morale of the team is really critical. So if people are down, they're just not going to be as effective as if they're feeling confident and being able to proactively approach problems and in good spirits. So it is not about touchy-feely. It's really about feeling good and confident. And that impacts how we approach problems. So the book identifies 3 different moods of morale that I can just jump right into if you want.
Sure. Yeah, please. Yeah, I'd love to hear for you to share those.
Well, the first one that I've identified is powerless. And that's where we all have felt in life, which what difference can I make? I'm only one person here. A lot of times that's where we might be in the middle of a layoff or there's super stress or the market has changed or the competitors just moved in on our major markets. And it's like it seems almost insurmountable. And it's like we might recognize that we're a leader, but we just almost feel powerless in the moment. The second type of mood is really the one to pay attention to. The first one's kind of obvious, but the second one, conditionally powerful. And that's where it's somewhat deceiving. We do recognize that we have power, but it's conditional on other things. For example, I can do a lot better job if the market changes, if we have better resources, if the economy changes, if there's more money, if we have better talent. And there are legitimate conditions to consider, but the ideal mood or mindset where we really want to be and get our whole team and organization to be is unconditionally powerful. And unconditionally powerful means we recognize, again, there's legitimate conditions, but we spend 100% of our energy on what we're going to do about it. Now, again, this sounds obvious, focus on what you can control, but just look at a typical meeting, how people often will complain and talk about things that are outside their control, which really we should be focused on what are we going to do about it? So when we're unconditionally powerful, we essentially ask ourselves and ask other people, what are we going to do about it? And that's where we focus our energy. And then the book is all about how to do that.
Love it. Love it. I want to go into this point of facts and story, but before we go there, you kind of like popped up a few things I'd love to explore here. This is something I've just been sort of thinking about is like athletes, they kind of like, the idea is that you focus on what you can control. What time do you wake up? How like a great athlete isn't the great when they're on the podium getting the gold medal. They're great 7 years before when they're waking up at 3 a.m. They know they need to swim this many laps, and there is this idea of like doing the work, right?
Yes.
Yeah. And, we haven't planned for this question, so I don't know if you have a thought on it, but it's just been bugging me is what about when you're playing a game that hasn't been played before and you don't know what the work is to be done? Like you're starting a new business or a new business model or something like that. And you can't really like know if kind of the thing that you can control actually will result in the outcome. How do you reconcile that?
Well, it still goes back to focusing on what we can control, right? Because in those situations, it's tempting to focus on what we can't control and what we don't know. But what do we know and what we're going to do about it? So I want to tackle this because I think it's really important because often when things look like we don't know a lot of things, we do the absolute worst thing, and that is not take action. We actually learn by taking action. So a lot of times when I'm working with teams, and again, whether they're doing strategy, whether they're increasing sales or just overall productivity or whatever they're trying to do, it's like take some action. The worst thing is inaction. And if you look at a lot of people who are not doing well, they're like, well, I'm not sure that will work. And maybe we do this, but you just do something. I've worked with the U.S. military, and I'm very proud to say that because I've learned so much. And they have a great quote: "No plan survives first contact with the enemy." No plan survives first contact with the enemy. In other words, we have to plan, but we have to plan for also that there's so much stuff we don't know and be able to adapt and change. And yet some people want to know all the answers before they move forward. And people who are like that are generally not successful. People who focus on massive action are generally successful because something's going to work.
I love that. That is the answer. That's great. That's the reconciliation, right? Because otherwise, even if you're creating best action, if there is no best action that's already documented or known, you need to create it. So you do that by confronting the enemy, which could be yourself, which could be the market, which could be and learning from that. Yeah.
Yeah. And I know I kind of kiddingly or somewhat serious said about, DC, the city of dysfunction, but let's look at that for a moment. And it's not about Republicans or Democrats. It's about it's like the problems are the problems. So what are we going to do about it? And let's work together. And that's really important because sometimes people are trying to get it their way. It's like often people say, do you want to be happy or do you want to be right? And happiness is about working together. Right is about sticking with our particular position. And what does it come down to? Well, let's move out and take action. So I don't mean to talk only about or talk about politics. I talk about this is true about life in general. When you really think about it, there's so much we are not in control of.
Yes.
And so successful people move forward. So instead of trying to have the right action, just take an action and we'll learn by doing.
Yes. And I guess that action could be go see what is already learned, what is already known, right? We did have Amy Edmondson on this podcast, and I know you talk about kind of the contrast of psychological safety, which she coined the term of, and we'll talk about that. But what I really liked about her most recent book, which is like The Right Kind of Wrong, what she says is that often we take action without first seeing what's already known, and so we kind of reinvent the wheel. Like we think no one's done this before. And you want to fail, like failure is a success when you have first checked, has someone failed on this before? You know?
Well, absolutely. We want to learn on the backs of others. And so that's absolutely. I'll share with you something, though, I like to talk about related to this. And that is whenever we're faced with a problem, and it deals with what you just brought up, it's like I share with people with 8 billion people who live on this planet. Chances are somebody has walked exactly in our shoes and figured out an answer. So when somebody says it can't be done, that's actually not truthful to say. All you could say is, I've never seen it be done. But just because we've never seen it be done doesn't mean it can't be done. So what I try to snap teams out of it is instead of focusing again on what you can't control and what's the right action, and is there a right action or is there an effective action, I'll just say, look, use reason and logic. Chances are there's somebody out there, some company, some organization that has faced the same kind of issues, maybe a tough market, or they've gone through specific challenges, or they've had to cut resources and they've had to double their revenue. Somebody out there has laid a path to go that way. And so our job is to go search for the answer. So I love what you're saying, because in life, we need to figure out that's probably somebody has not only done this, but done it well. We're just not the first people that, I mean, I always tease people. What are we coming up with a problem and saying, I've discovered a problem that nobody has ever solved? Chances are somebody has solved it.
I know.
So let's go out and find it.
Yeah. And I do see the reverse as well. Like people say, well, it's not the reverse, but you do an ideation session and someone says, oh my God, this is an impossible idea. It could never happen. But if you circle that idea and say, well, let's find out if it really could never happen, and you go look, you often find someone has already done it. And it actually is much easier than you thought. And we conflate the I have never seen it been done with this is not possible.
Absolutely. In fact, if we think about it, beliefs drive our actions. Actions don't tend to drive beliefs. So people say, I'll believe it when I see it. The problem is they almost never see it because they don't believe it. Think about that. You could say, well, what if we do that? Oh, that probably wouldn't work. Oh, it's not. And they don't realize that their belief is shaping what they're going to do about it. Versus one of the essential elements of building great teams is believe that anything is possible. Now, do we know that anything is possible? No, I don't know that. But having that belief has us go out there and search. But if we think we've uncovered a problem that can't be solved, we'll quit. So my philosophy is believe that anything can be solved, because chances are we're likely to solve it. So belief drives actions. Actions don't drive beliefs.
Love it. I love it. I love it. I feel like there's an important distinction that really resonated with me in your book that is coming up here, right? So there is the difference between I have never seen it been done. That's a fact. And then there is the story that we create about that, which is it can't be done, right?
Yeah.
And so if you could just lay out that distinction for us, what happened and the story around what happened.
Yeah, in the book, and actually a core part of what we do is distinguishing what we notice from what we imagine. So a variation of exactly what you just mentioned. And notice versus imagine. Notice are the facts of the situation. Imagine is all of our thoughts, opinions, and evaluations. So we can notice somebody's looking at their watch and we imagine they're disinterested. but it could mean they have to take medication. Or how about this? They're curious what time it is. But we have a propensity to see people's actions, listen to their words, and run to the races with what that means instead of checking in and finding out exactly what the case is. So what I've noticed about great teams, and another essential element, there's 12, but of effective teams, of great teams, is they distinguish what they notice from what they imagine. And by doing that, you realize there's so much possibility out there. What's limited us is a lot of times confirmation bias. We have a perspective, and then going back to what we talked about earlier, we see what we want to see. So distinguishing what we notice from what we imagine. And the majority is, in life, there's very little things you can notice. In fact, really, there's only 3 major categories you can ever notice about a human being. Our actions, our words, and our appearance. There are other smaller categories, but actions, words, and appearance is about it. And so in a session, I like to do this distinction of I notice and I imagine. And then we developed an exercise years ago that proves to people, so kind of brace yourself with the findings, and people are going to probably challenge this, but we've proven in this experiential exercise I take people through that most of what we think about on a daily basis is incorrect. Most is incorrect. Now, people say, that's not really true. I can think of all the times we're right. Well, again, we tend to record all the times we're right, and we tend to forget the times that we're wrong. Have you ever had a friend who's very self-righteous and they actually think they've always been right? And you might be around them and you're like, I can remember the time they were wrong about this, this, and this, but they've constructed in their mind how they're always right. So in fact, the people to watch out for are self-righteous people. People believe that their self is always right. But going back to that distinction, notice versus imagine, it's very powerful to distinguish the two.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's why we talk a lot about kind of the listeners of this podcast and the members of Outthinker. We use the term smart enough to be humble. It's like the more that you know, the more you realize that maybe you don't know, or maybe what you know is wrong. And it really takes a confidence to be able to say, hey, I may be wrong. I did fail. I'm not right all the time.
In fact, the best CEOs, admirals, and generals I've ever worked with realize how often they can be wrong. So that plagues them. So they're always in search of what they don't know. An interesting distinction I've seen with successful people versus not. Successful people tend to have the frame of what don't I know and in search of. Unsuccessful people tend to want to verify and legitimize all the things they do know. So they're in search of confirmation that they do know. But the greatest leaders are plagued with the reality. There's so much I don't know. I always have to be learning. So here's how this translates. Great leaders spend time more listening than they do talking because they want to learn from others. And we've all been around people who are not as effective because they're in the transmit mode. I mean, even the stuff that I'm teaching here, and we're going through here and in the books are things that I've learned. In fact, Unconditional Power, I can share with you the basis of why I came up with it, but because I've been plagued with moods. Now, I was never clinically depressed, but I began in search of there has to be a better way to snap out of it because my mood impacted others. So what I'm saying is there's so much out there we don't know, and great leaders focus on what they don't know rather than trying to double down on what they do know.
So that's great. So let's go to, the military leaders, the generals, the CEOs that you've gotten to work with and you've coached. We had someone on the podcast recently, and he said that if we look at effective leaders, they're not necessarily liked. They don't necessarily have charisma. What he thinks it is that they represent a future that people want to be part of. And I think that if you represent a future, there is one way to say the future is I am confident that this is going to happen. I know this is going to happen, which you can see being in conflict with I'm being wrong, right? But then when I think about leaders, I don't know exactly, but I think about leaders who do this, right? We're going to put a man on the moon. Do we know how to do that? No, we don't, right? So how do you reconcile that? Because I can see many leaders are like, okay, I need to show them that I know this is going to happen and I have the vision and I have it all figured out. You have to follow me, right? And what we're saying is, no, that's not successful. We need to be in search of what we don't know.
Well, you bring up an interesting subject around leadership and having people follow and generally perspective. And what we're talking about is vision. And I've there's a distinction I like to go through called a leadership gravitational pull. Why is it that some leaders have people that want to be, people want to follow them? It's like they have a strong gravitational pull. And then other people we've been around, they want to repel us, right? Or or feel repelled, right? So what are the types of people that have a strong gravitational pull? Well, one of the key traits is being passionate and optimistic about the future, which is what I think you're bringing up. And that is great leaders have a big vision, and they're not just have the big vision, but they're excited about it. They're passionate about it. Now, do they have to act like a cheerleader? No. I mean, it's not that, but they strong and confident about it. And to your point, the best ones I've heard will say, this is what we're going to do, and we will get there. Do I have all the answers? No, that's why I need you, but I'm confident we can get there. So their confidence derives from we will be there. Years ago, I had a bad television show. It was not very good. It was public access, and it was a mess. But anyway, what I realized, and I interviewed a lot of interesting, successful people, but one leader's name was Scott DeGiamarino. And when Scott took over an area at Ameriprise that was ranked 121, and he turned them into a great team and number one, and he did it 6 out of 7 years. So extremely successful. What he said when he first took over the team and the overall organization, he said, we will be number one. I hope you're with me, but we're going to be number one. I need you, and I want people all together to working towards that, but we're going to be number one. And people loved him. He's also the person that said to me, I'll never forget this, even though it was years ago, if you can't change the people, change the people. In other words, if you can't change them, then you got to change them, right? There's certain people that got us to a certain level, but if they're fighting us on this vision, and it doesn't mean, again, they don't have all the answers, but it's the commitment to go search for the answers. So passionate and optimistic about the future. That's one key trait of having a strong leadership gravitational pull.
I love it. I love it. Yeah. And I imagine you have a certain amount of time to change the people, depending on how urgent it is, how quickly you need to get to that next stage of the vision. Some people can change more slowly and some more quickly. And so, it kind of depends on the urgency. And
I was going to say, this isn't like firing a whole bunch of people. They may be in the wrong position, but whatever it is, we got to get them moving out. Because here's what I've also worked with a lot of executives on. Whenever they tell me a problem, I always ask them, how's their leadership team? Because if their leadership team is not emulating what they want, there's the problem. Although it doesn't always look like that, and I've had people challenge me. For example, we had a potential customer turned into a customer. He said, look, our problem is not our leadership team. It's the mid-level. And I said, well, who's in charge of the mid-level? And he goes, oh, yeah, good point. In other words, that still goes back to the leadership team. People follow the leader.
Got it. Love it. So let's go back to leader here. And I love this, this point that you make about getting the unsaid said, right? Because there is like a point where people don't want to, you can get this leadership bubble. You can get people, maybe they're not lying to you, but they're editing, right? And I've heard about this for certain, I don't want to generalize, but certain functions, CEOs have warned me, when you don't get the numbers from them, there's probably something going on, right? So to tell us about why that's important, getting the unsaid said, and give us some advice on how to do that.
Well, thanks for bringing it up, because another essential element, but I think it's the most pivotal one of all, is getting the unsaid said. So here's what I'd like people to consider. The number one problem with all teams and all organizations is lack of honest communication. But what I mean by honest communication, it's not the truth or lies and the ethics. I mean, there are some people that are problematic in that way, but the majority of people are trying to do the best they can. The biggest problem is not what people say. It's actually what they don't say. It's what they leave out. And I want to really give an easy, typical kind of example to just show how often this can be the problem. I had a lady who shared with me in a session, well, sometimes you get the unsaid said and people don't like it. I said, well, what's going on? She said, I'm working with somebody, a peer, and he drops the ball. He's messing up. So I told him that, and he didn't like it. And I said to her, okay, valid point. Why did you say that? And she said, well, I care about him. I want us to all work better together. I want us to be successful, and I'm willing to support him. I said, did you say all of that? And she said, no.
Mm.
And I said, I want to contend that the problem wasn't what you said. It's all the other stuff you leave out. I was working with this executive who the team didn't trust, and it's because he asked a lot of questions. So I asked him, why are you asking questions? And he said, I want to challenge people, and I'm trying to learn from the team. I said, did he say that? And he goes, nope. So it was an easy fix. When we did the session with his team, he started off and said, look, I understand some of you don't trust me because I ask a lot of questions. Here's why. And he explained it. And the team went, oh. And guess what? He continued then to ask a lot of questions because now people understood it.
Yes.
So
yes.
really what trips us up in life isn't what we say, it's what we're not saying. And the key is to get the unsaid said.
I see. I hadn't thought of it that way, from the other way around, kind of the person that is asking for the truth. Yeah. I do know one person, an executive who I happen to be married to, and she says that what she has to often say is, look, I'm known for asking a lot of questions, and I don't have a hypothesis behind the questions. I'm not trying to corner you. I just have questions. And she has to say it because the way that she asks questions, it almost sounds like an interrogation, but she's just curious,
I love that.
Yeah. Yeah.
I love that because she's owning. Well, I'm going to say because she's being authentic. So often people coach others to not be authentic. Own yourself. And like, if you're assertive and you have a tendency to jump the gun, say to people, look, when I hear a problem, I tend to jump the gun and want to launch into action. And if I'm launching too quickly, push back on me. In other words, they get the unsaid said. Another thing I like to do with teams is have everybody share their biggest challenge or weakness and then how can the team support them? And I've had people share things like, I have a hard time delegating. So if you see me not delegating, instead of saying, I don't trust you, think, well, he or she has a hard time delegating and reach out to that person. So in other words, it still comes back to getting the unsaid said. So what I love about the example on your wife is she's owning who she is. She's not changing who she is.
Right.
And it's just about getting the unsaid said.
I love it. So, what's really, you work with government and public sector, right?
Yes.
Look, if I'm a general and I'm given a mission, right? I have to achieve that mission. I have to be the leader that causes that mission to be achieved. I don't get to say, I don't believe in it, right? And you also have this idea, this radical agreement from Amazon, right? Disagree. And then when we decide, we agree, right? No, I told you so, or, so talk to us about, like, as a leader, authenticity, and how do you balance your personal mission, beliefs, purpose, right, with what the organization needs now?
Well, so what I've found is it's the question we're asking, how do I join that? Which is a really good point. And I will say I've worked with Amazon and specifically Amazon Web Services, and they have now 16 leadership principles. And one of the greatest things to learn from Amazon is they live by those leadership principles. It's not something like, oh, it's a plaque or something. They hire based on that. They talk about it. And what you're bringing up is disagree and commit, which is a very powerful one. And we can disagree, but once we make a commitment, we move out. And having worked with the military, I can tell you that a lot of generals will disagree and they will fight that battle. But when a decision is made, they own it. And if you think about it, it's critical to moving forward. Can you imagine if I'm a general or somebody in the military and you're part of my team and I said, look, we got to take that hill. I don't think it's a very good idea. And I'm not really aligned with that, but just do your best job. That would be very demotivating. And yet some leaders in the corporate world and in life operate that way. Instead of what we should do is fight the battles, whatever. But once we're given that goal and objective and mission, then we have to spend 100% of our energy back to unconditional power. What are we going to do about it? So then what I want to say is, look, this is the goal. And we're going to do everything we can to get there. Somebody might say, well, what do you think? I said, We're going to get there. Well, what are your opinions? It doesn't matter. We are going to achieve it. And the reason why is my confidence and that person's confidence in taking that hill has a lot to do with people being successful. Back to the, feeling powerless or conditional or unconditionally powerful. So we want people to really own it. And the first way to get people to own it is we need to own it. The first sale begins with ourselves, and then we want to share that with others.
I love it. I love it. Just peeking a little bit into like the psychology of that, especially for Amazon, but for anywhere. Surely you have experienced as well. I've seen many organizations where there isn't really agreement, right? It's like, yeah, Steven's the boss. We had a meeting. It was decided. I agreed to go on, but I still don't believe this is the right thing to do, right? And I can see how that damages team effectiveness. So what's like this, the logical reconciliation of that is, for example, it could be, okay, I'm one person out of 10 or out of the team, and the team is more important and our mission is more important. So I'm going to set that aside and go with the team. How do you get someone who wants to hold on to, I still don't agree, to get them on board?
Well, the first thing is to get that shared. And the reason why is the worst kind of disagreement is hidden disagreement. So we want to get the unsaid said. So when I'm working with teams, let's unearth it all. Let's get it all out there. And then a strategy to kind of take off that person's edge towards how they're approaching it is to do what I call a T-chart of notice and imagine. You put notice on one side and imagine on the other, of a ledger, you could say. And then I guide the team to say, let's look at the facts. And, back to our words, actions, and appearance. And inevitably what a team will find out is we're separating, the fact from opinions and assumptions, and there's very little facts. And then usually that takes the edge off someone who's holding on to their opinion, because they realize you can have that opinion, but what are the facts? So that's a way to break through it. And then there are 3 effective questions to really help facilitate a team moving forward. What would you suggest? Second would be, what would it take for you to agree, right? Somebody says, I disagree. What would it take to get agreement? And third is saying, can you live with it? Can you live with it? And can you live with it doesn't mean we complain about it endlessly. It means we accept, hey, maybe I might be wrong. I disagree, but I'm willing to commit and moving forward. It's not that big a deal. So those 3 questions, along with the T-chart of notice and imagine, is very powerful. In fact, I'll share with you, I worked with a company and the government entity, and they had a big disagreement. And we just did a T-chart of notice and imagine, and it was a problem that they had a lot of disagreement over for an entire year. But the team collectively, all sides, looked at what are the facts, and then they broke that apart from what they imagined, and they realized that there was very little facts, and they immediately figured out a solution. So in about 20 minutes, something that had plagued them for a year was solved with a strategy of notice and imagine, and that T-chart of notice and imagine.
Love it. Love it. That is great. That's so practical. And it leads to like what I was going to ask you about next, which is about accountability and commitment. And I won't go into it. My father's a professor for a long time, social constructionism. And one thing that he was kind of like talked about was that you cannot have accountability without choice. I can't tell you, Stephen, you are accountable for delivering 15 without you having the choice to choose 15. Like, that's compliance, right? You can comply, right? But for you to be committed and really own it, there has to be choice. Now, sometimes your choice is 15 or nothing, right? But you can choose. You could choose 15. You know what I mean? So talk to us a little bit, because I think a lot of organizations operate around this compliance, this dictating, and, oh, well, you told me I didn't, but I know it's not possible to get 15. What advice do you have for really creating accountability and commitment?
Well, first of all, again, the worst kind of disagreement is hidden disagreement. So we want to unearth it. So the good news is people start sharing it. And then it does come down to, what would you suggest? What would it take for you to agree? Or can you live with it? And moving it forward. Regarding choice is an interesting thing, because I would say we're always choosing. Nobody is ever making us do anything. So somebody might say, well, I don't choose to want to come to work. Okay, well, then don't come to work. Well, I I am because I want to get a paycheck and
Right.
to feed my family. Great. So you're choosing. And the reason why that's important is because we're always choosing. So we got to get out of this whole blaming and victim and all this and being powerless. It's okay to think that way. And we've all felt this way at times.
Yeah.
I agree.
Yeah.
But it's not a great way to live. We're always choosing. You could choose to do all kinds of things. Now, some are illegal, some are legal, but I'm saying you're always choosing. So the truth is, the facts are, we're always choosing. The question is, what are our choice? You could choose to participate or choose to not. And there's always going to be consequences and benefits to what we're doing. So we're always choosing.
It's so hard for people to accept that, right? I mean, well, it's so tempting. It feels so good not to have choice, right? Because, oh, it's not my fault. But then going back to the beginning of power, right? That's where you give up your power. It's like, no, I'm not at choice.
Well,
Right.
and there are three characteristics of being unconditionally powerful. And one of the most important ones is we take full responsibility for our attitude and actions.
Yeah.
We take full responsibility for our attitude and actions. And again, I shared earlier how I started down the path of this book because I suffered from this. And there's a guy as a mentor of mine, his name is Jim Goldstein. And what Jim said to me is happiness is an inside job. And when he said that, it was really eye-opening because before that I'd say I'd be happy if this person, that thing or whatever. It was always outside, but happiness is an inside job. And you really look at it, some people who have a lot less than us are really happy. So it's not about our belongings. It really is happiness is an inside job. And then we have to take full responsibility for attitude and actions. So we got to get out of this that they made us feel this way. Kind of look at it this way. I love to do this in sessions. Like if I say, I'll tease people, I'll say, they made me say yes. Well, what do they creep inside my body, move my lips and make me say yes? No, they did what they did. And I chose to say yes. I might have wanted to say no, but I still chose to say yes. Okay.
Yes.
So
Yes.
we choose. We always choose.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So we're reaching the top of our time with you. And I have one question that probably has lots of answers here. So you can choose where to begin it. Leader of a team of 15, like I can own myself, and then that will have an impact on those 15.
Yeah.
Leader of a team of 15 that in turn lead teams of 50, right? How do I start to scale this power propagation or this way of operating so that I get the people around me to adopt this so that their teams can be led this way?
So great point. And in the book, it's input drives output. So, so this is going to sound like I'm not answering the question, but I want to introduce this principle and then tie it into exactly what you're asking.
Sure.
So in life, whatever we want to have as an attitude or perspective, we can look at our input. So who are we surrounded by? What books are we reading? What's our environment like? Our input drives our output. So if we're being negative, well, what are we surrounding ourselves by? And again, still, what do we choose to do? Who do we choose to be around with? And people might say, and I've had people say, well, I can't choose everybody I work with and my family or relatives or whatever. I'll say, okay, I understand that, but we can choose how much time we spend and how we do that. So input drives output. But the reason why this is so important is our output are other people's input. And their input are other people's output. So when you look at the greatest leaders over time, like Gandhi and Martin Luther King, and I love to cite them because they never held political office. They were never officially the person in power.
Formal power.
Changed the world. They changed the world,
Good
right?
point.
Because they looked at themselves and what am I going to do? Focus 100% of their energy on what they're going to do. And their output was so powerful, it triggered other people's input, which was their output, which was their input, which was their output. And that's how one person can change the world. And people are like, well, that's a heavy statement. Well, you can definitely change your family and team and your own environment by focusing on yourself.
I love it. I love it. Be the change. As Gandhi said, I love it. Awesome. Thank you. This has been really invigorating. And there's so much more that we can explore. I love that you kind of bring this like combination of just like a commitment and power to really practical things, 3 things, steps. And yet in the book we didn't have time here to go through all 9 strategies, but I see how they kind of one builds on another. So we're going to definitely encourage people to buy that book and your prior book. How else can people learn from you, connect with you, and potentially work with you?
Well, if they want to have a call or whatever, they're welcome to do that. The easiest way to do this is go to justbehonest.com, justbehonest.com, which is our website.
I love it. Wow.
They can contact and then have a call with myself or a member of their team. But here's what I want to also say is if they mention your show, we'll send them a chapter out of Unconditional Power that lays out that distinction of powerless, conditional, and unconditional power. The reason why that chapter alone, even if they don't buy the book, even if they don't work with us, that chapter is so powerful because you can then have a conversation with your own team about where are we on this continuum and what we're going to do about it. So they got to mention the show and then reach out and we'll send them that chapter for free, whether or not they buy the book. And no matter what, we'd love to hear what they have to say about it. And just reach us at justbehonest.com. That's justbehonest.com.
Amazing. I'm glad you got that domain. That's amazing. And thank you for the generous offer. Thank you for taking the time to sit with us and unpack some of what you have through a lifetime of working with leaders developed. Thank you, Stephen.
And thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Strategy at Scale. Thanks to our guest, Stephen Gaffney, our producer, Nazanin Humayan Jam, our editor, James Pierce, and the rest of the team at Outthinker and Scaling Up. If you like what you heard, please download and subscribe. I'm your host, Kayan Krippendorf. Thank you for listening. We'll catch you next time with another episode of Strategy at Scale.